It was supposed to be just another Friday night segment, fast-paced, sharp, and soaked in sarcasm. Candace Owens sat across from Ibrahim Traoré in a sleek Manhattan studio, cameras rolling, the lighting perfect. The crowd had been carefully selected, half American conservatives, half international observers. A political circus, finely curated. Candace leaned in with a smirk that millions had come to recognize. "Tell me, Captain Traoré," she said, dragging out the title mockingly, "do you really believe all those tribal customs and barefoot ideologies are the foundation of a modern state?" A few nervous laughs fluttered through the studio. Traoré didn't flinch. She continued. "You speak of dignity, of roots. But let's be honest. Africa's roots gave us child soldiers, dictators, and mud huts. Civilization didn't come from there, it came to there." Silence fell like a curtain. Even the production crew stiffened. For a second, it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Traoré looked at her, not with rage, but with the kind of calm that unsettles. "Is that what you see when you look at us?" he asked, his voice low but clear. "Then maybe it's not us who are blind." Candace chuckled, unfazed. "Come on, it's not personal. I just tell the truth. And the truth is, Africa still needs a babysitter." That's when the cameras caught it, the narrowing of Traoré's eyes, the subtle lift of his chin. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Calculation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Then prepare to be sued for $200 million, he said. The studio erupted, not with applause, but stunned gasps. Candace blinked, thrown off for the first time. "Excuse me?" Traoré leaned forward, placed a single sheet of paper on the table between them. "Defamation. Cultural degradation. International insult. I came here to speak. You came here to smear. Let the court decide what freedom of speech really means." Suddenly, the segment that was supposed to ridicule had transformed into a reckoning. And Candace? She wasn't laughing anymore. By Monday morning, the headline had eclipsed nearly every major story on American media. Candace Owens sued for $200 million after mocking African heritage on live TV. Pundits scrambled to reframe it. Was it a publicity stunt? A free speech test? Or had Traoré just declared cultural war on Western arrogance? In a press conference outside the UN building in New York, Traoré didn't mince words. "I didn't come to entertain," he began. "I came because our dignity is not up for debate." When an American commentator mocks the cultural bloodlines of an entire continent, on live television, and calls it the truth, she's not just mocking me. She's mocking centuries of struggle, survival, and sovereignty. The crowd was silent, journalists hanging on to every syllable. Behind him stood a team of international legal advisors, African diplomats, and US-based civil rights attorneys. This wasn't just a symbolic move. The paperwork was real. The filing had been submitted. The sum was calculated. The intent was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Candace Owens took to social media, spinning hard. "So now we're suing over facts," she tweeted. "Is this what leadership looks like, crying over history instead of building a future?" But it didn't land the way she'd hoped. A viral clip from the broadcast, Traoré's calm voice saying, "Prepare to be sued for $200 million, was reshared across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Millions of viewers didn't see a fragile leader. They saw someone who didn't flinch when mocked. He acted. He confronted. He pushed back. And then came the unexpected twist. A growing number of African American academics, artists, and students began voicing support, not necessarily for Traoré's politics, but for the principle. "He did what many of us wished we could," one professor from Howard University posted. "He stood up to a system that's made a career out of ridicule." Even some on the American left, who often had little patience for strongman figures, began asking questions. Had Candace finally gone too far? Back at the heart of it all, Traoré was unmoved by trending hashtags. The damage was done on camera, he told a Reuters journalist. Let the truth stand there, in full color, in full sound. That's the evidence. And so, the trial of dignity versus mockery was no longer theoretical. It was becoming historic. Within 48 hours, the narrative had shifted from controversial lawsuit to global reckoning. Commentators who had laughed off the case on day one were now retracting their jokes. What looked like a media stunt was snowballing into a cultural referendum, with one side rooted in unapologetic tradition and the other in sarcastic skepticism. Cable news descended into chaos. CNN hosted a four-person panel, where an African political scholar stared down a conservative commentator who insisted Candace Owens had simply exercised her freedom of speech. Freedom to mock the identity of entire civilizations, the scholar fired back. This isn't about one insult. It's about centuries of being told that our skin, our tongue, our roots are punchlines. Even Fox News found itself torn. While some hosts doubled down behind Candace, others hinted that she may have gone too far this time. Behind closed doors, advertisers were reportedly uneasy. A few major sponsors quietly paused campaigns linked to Candace's segments. But the most shocking shift came from the public, not just in Africa, but in the U.S. Students at Columbia, Yale, and Howard University staged walkouts, holding signs that read, "Our culture is not a joke. $200 million for 200 years. Traoré spoke. Now listen. The lawsuit hadn't just filed a legal case, it had ignited a cultural firestorm. Traoré, meanwhile, was measured, calm, and ruthless. He refused interviews with sensationalist networks and instead appeared on PBS, sitting across from a quiet, composed interviewer. The tone was respectful, but his words were clear. I'm not trying to silence America. I'm trying to remind it, the world is listening now. That one sentence went viral. In Dakar, a 22-year-old musician remixed the quote into a hip-hop track titled, "The World is Listening." In Los Angeles, a mural of Traoré rose on the side of a community center in Watts. In London, pro bono lawyers offered support. Even in Paris, where tensions with Traoré's government had previously run high, a French-Algerian senator tweeted in his defense. Candace Owens, sensing the pressure, shifted tone, but not by much. In a live stream viewed by 3 million people, she said, "I'm not apologizing. Because truth doesn't bow to outrage. If you're offended by facts, that's your weakness." Traoré responded not with anger, but with one sentence, posted on his official account. Then prepare for a courtroom where truth stands under oath. As social momentum built around Traoré's lawsuit, the real panic wasn't in the media, it was in boardrooms and back channels. Washington's political operatives weren't worried about $200 million. They were worried about precedent. If Traoré succeeded in holding a prominent American figure accountable for cultural defamation on live television, who would be next? Within the State Department, a memo circulated urgently. Potential diplomatic fallout, legal friction with African sovereignties. At the White House, aides whispered about the need to distance from the noise without alienating African partnerships. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement was hanging by threads, and U.S. influence was already shrinking on the continent. Traoré was making it worse, strategically. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted the world to witness the silence. And that silence was louder than any insult Candace Owens could deliver. In private, conservative donors pressured networks, shut this down. But Candace refused to back off. She took to her podcast, this time swinging even harder. This man wants money? Let's talk about how much his country gets in aid every year. Maybe he should start by suing his own government for corruption. It was a grenade, except it exploded in her own hand. Traoré's administration responded instantly with transparency. Within hours, they published a decade's worth of aid records, contracts, and spending allocations. Nothing hidden. Nothing blurred. And in a rare move, Traoré opened the books live on Al Jazeera. Sitting in front of a massive LED screen, he pointed at the numbers. "Here's your aid," he said. "Here's what you called help. Now here's what you extracted in return." Charts showed American companies profiting 4 to 1 for every dollar donated. Military contracts. Mining licenses. Infrastructure built by U.S. firms charging triple local market rates. The room fell silent. Viewers didn't just see a president. They saw a prosecutor. A strategist. And a man who wasn't afraid to drag every double standard into the light. Even critics of Traoré, African and Western alike, paused. This wasn't about cancel culture anymore. This was a chessboard. And Traoré had just moved his queen. By the time Traoré was invited to CNN for a balanced conversation, the damage had already been done. But producers thought they could spin it. Frame him as a strongman exploiting identity politics. They brought in 3 American commentators. And Candace, remotely. The panel was set up like a trial. Only problem? The defendant brought his own gavel. The moderator opened sharply. "President Traoré, isn't this just political theater? A lawsuit over hurt feelings?" Traoré didn't flinch. "No," he said calmly. "It's an audit. Of how far your freedom of speech reaches, when aimed at people you don't control." Candace interrupted from the screen, scoffing. "You act like your country is a victim. Africa's had decades to grow. Maybe stop blaming others." That was it. The mask slipped. The audience shifted. Traoré leaned in, voice low but crisp. "We had decades. You had centuries. We had invasions. You had Wall Street. We built nations while under sanctions. You built yours while owning others." The studio fell into a deep silence. A camera operator froze mid-zoom. Even the host, trained in recovery, didn't speak. But Traoré wasn't done. He held up a printout, Candace's old tweets mocking African education, accents, and infrastructure. He read them aloud, slowly. This wasn't opinion. This was ridicule. You didn't criticize policy. You mocked people. Their names. Their beliefs. Their mothers. Candace stammered something about context. "Here's context," Traoré said. "We've been quiet for too long. And silence," he paused, "isn't diplomacy. It's decay." The moderator, flustered, tried to pivot. "But what do you hope to achieve with this lawsuit?" Traoré's answer was chilling in its simplicity. A line. A border between mockery and consequence. He stood up before the segment ended, removed his microphone, and walked out. That clip alone racked up 40 million views in 2 days. Traoré wasn't just suing Candace Owens anymore. He was suing a system, and winning the jury of public opinion, one brutal truth at a time. By the time the actual lawsuit papers were filed in Manhattan, the internet had already delivered its verdict. The clip of Traoré reading Candace's tweets had become an anthem in classrooms, civil rights forums, and even in late-night monologues. People weren't just watching a legal case unfold, they were watching a reckoning. But the networks didn't back down. Fox News called it a PR stunt. MSNBC claimed it was global posturing. Candace herself, now doubling down, posted a video titled, "I Said What I Said." And in the background, her legal team prepared for war. But so did Traoré. He arrived at the courthouse not in a luxury car, but on foot, flanked by local community leaders, students, and African American historians. It wasn't a show. It was a procession. When reporters rushed him with microphones, Traoré simply said, "You can't insult history and expect it to stay silent." Inside, the energy was tense. Candace's lawyers argued for dismissal, calling the lawsuit political theater wrapped in emotional manipulation. They claimed Traoré, a foreign leader, had no standing. But Traoré's lawyer, a sharp former Harvard professor named Nia Daniels, stood and sliced through the room like a blade. This isn't about one man. This is about a pattern of using platforms to punch down, and hiding behind free speech while doing it. She then projected Candace's past comments onto the courtroom screen. Not once. Not twice. But in a timeline stretching over a decade. The language wasn't policy critique, it was mockery. Of clothing, religion, accents, even funerary traditions. Some jurors winced. But it was Traoré's testimony, brief, measured, that landed the blow. We were told to be grateful. We were told to laugh it off. But I will not allow Africa's dignity to be a punchline, not in my presence. Reporters outside typed feverishly. Tweets exploded. And across America, a strange thing happened. Students, professors, and even celebrities began quoting him. Not in my presence. It was a phrase suddenly tattooed across protest signs, trending hashtags, even late-night interviews. Candace had sought to diminish him. But the courtroom had elevated him into something more than a leader. A symbol. And the trial wasn't even halfway done. Candace Owens had always thrived on chaos, rapid reactions, viral soundbites, controversy as currency. But this time, something felt different. The more she attacked, the more poised Traoré seemed. And worse for her, the more America started listening to him. So, her team changed tactics. They tried to paint Traoré as out of touch. He doesn't understand American values, her lawyer argued on Tucker Carlson's show. He's trying to import the politics of grievance. But the public wasn't buying it. They remembered that courtroom line, not in my presence. It wasn't grievance. It was a boundary. Meanwhile, Traoré went quiet. No press tours. No interviews. Just silence. And in that silence, something strange happened. People began to speak for him. Students organized teach-ins on African history. Veterans of civil rights struggles posted essays online. Even celebrities who'd never mentioned Traoré before were now referencing his stand as a moment of moral clarity. And Candace? She became louder. More desperate. She published a documentary titled The Deception of Dignity, calling Traoré a global actor staging a narrative for power. But the backlash was swift. An editor at The Atlantic called the film intellectually dishonest. A top legal podcast dissected her argument and concluded, if this is her defense, she's already lost. The real blow came when an unexpected ally entered the scene, one who neither Candace nor her followers could dismiss, retired Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. In a televised panel, she said, "There's a difference between free speech and sanctioned cruelty. The law must know that line." Traoré had never asked for defenders. But now, they were everywhere. And Candace? She wasn't just fighting a courtroom battle anymore. She was losing a cultural one. Inside the courtroom, Traoré finally broke his silence. You don't respond to disrespect with volume. You respond with vision. It wasn't just a trial now. It was a referendum. The courtroom was quieter than usual. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone knew what was coming. The tension had shifted. This wasn't about whether Traoré had a case. It was about how far Candace Owens had fallen. Her legal team still showed up in sleek suits, armed with binders and bravado. But they looked tired. The media frenzy that had once orbited Candace like a crown now felt like a swarm. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Traoré, do you wish to make a closing statement?" He stood slowly. No theatrics. No lectern pounding. Just eyes steady, voice clear. This isn't about money. It never was. This is about dignity, something you can't borrow, and you can't fake. I didn't sue to silence her. I sued because silence lets people believe she was right. A pause. I'm not ashamed of where I come from. But some people are ashamed of who they've become. Gasps rippled through the back rows. Even the opposing counsel looked down. Candace, seated rigidly in her chair, blinked rapidly but didn't speak. The defiance was gone. The smirk? Buried under the weight of unintended consequences. Then came the ruling. The judge didn't just side with Traoré. She scorched the record. Freedom of speech does not protect the weaponization of history against the people who lived it. This court finds the defendant liable for defamation and malicious intent. The sum? $200 million in damages. But the real damage? Candace's brand had imploded. That night, her sponsors pulled out. Her social media feeds flooded with silence. No praise, no defense. Only questions. But Traoré didn't gloat. He walked out of the courthouse without celebration, speaking only to a single microphone. I don't want an apology. I want us to stop confusing cruelty with courage. It wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a cultural reset. The following morning, American media didn't know how to spin it. That was the first sign something seismic had happened. Left-leaning outlets hesitated to defend Candace Owens. Right-leaning networks couldn't quite throw their weight behind her either, not when $200 million and a courtroom's judgment painted her not as a provocateur, but a liability. Social media? A different battlefield. #Traoré wins was trending globally. But it wasn't just celebration, it was reflection. From Nairobi to New York, users posted photos of their heritage, quotes about dignity, and in one viral video, a Ghanaian student said, "They say speak English." Traoré showed them how to speak truth. In the US, opinion columns debated the ripple effect. Could this spark a wider reckoning for public figures who trafficked in shock jabs at others' identity? One headline in The Atlantic read, "Candace Owens thought Africa was a punchline. Traoré made her the joke." She tried to fight back. Candace uploaded a 7-minute video titled, "I was cancelled for telling the truth." But it lacked teeth. No outrage, no fire, just a woman spinning in circles while the world moved on. Meanwhile, Traoré received an invitation. Columbia University. They wanted him to speak on decolonizing discourse. It wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. American academia, often accused of ignoring African voices, now wanted the voice that shook the culture war. He accepted, but added a condition: the session would be streamed publicly and free for all. "Let the world hear," he said. Not just the elite. A week later, as he stepped onto the Columbia stage, the room stood silent. Then, applause. From professors. From students. Even from a few critics who now realized, maybe he wasn't trying to divide. Maybe he was trying to repair. He opened with one sentence. Africa didn't lose its voice, it was silenced. Today, we take the mic back. And in that moment, Traoré wasn't just a leader from abroad. He was the voice America didn't know it needed to hear. As Traoré stepped off the Columbia stage, reporters flooded the courtyard. Microphones flew toward him, each one representing a network that had once ignored or caricatured him. But this time, he didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Now you'll have to report the truth, not just ratings." The crowd froze. No one knew if it was a challenge, a warning, or both. That night, the lawsuit hit its final milestone, a legal victory. The judge ruled in Traoré's favor. Owens was ordered to pay $200 million in damages for what was ruled a targeted, racially charged defamation campaign with global implications. More than a legal blow, it was a message. Words had weight again. Candace Owens didn't appear at the ruling. Her legal team issued a short statement. No apology. No admission. Just silence. But the silence was telling. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, thousands gathered in the streets. Not in protest, but in pride. Giant screens replayed Traoré's speech from Colombia. Children held signs that read, "Our roots are not a joke." Even critics of Traoré, those who questioned his military path to power, had to pause. Because he hadn't just spoken for Burkina Faso. He hadn't just defended Africa. He had drawn a line in global discourse, and dared the West to cross it. And many refused. Politicians from South America, Asia, and even Europe sent messages of solidarity. Traoré didn't reply to most. He didn't need to. The victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the reversal of expectation. An African leader defended dignity against a global media figure, and won. And in his final interview of the year, when asked if he had a message for Owens, he paused, then said, "I don't seek her apology. I seek her understanding. But if that's too much to ask, I'll settle for her silence." A pause. That, too, is a form of respect. And with that, Ibrahim Traoré turned, walked away from the camera, and left a world stirred, not by anger, but by dignity wrapped in defiance. He didn't just end the story. He rewrote how it would be told. Some people speak to be heard. Others speak to be remembered. But Traoré? He speaks to shift the ground beneath your feet. In a world where mockery travels faster than meaning, he chose meaning. When Candace Owens tried to reduce a continent to a punchline, he didn't raise his voice, he raised the stakes. $200 million wasn't just about money. It was about memory. The memory of roots mocked. The dignity denied. And the quiet rage of a people who are done being polite about being erased. The courtroom gave him justice. But the streets gave him something more powerful, legacy. And maybe now, when they speak his name, it won't be with condescension or confusion, but with caution, and perhaps, respect. Because Traoré didn't just answer an insult. He turned it into a monument.